My name is Olivia Bennett. Growing up in Maplewood, a picturesque suburb outside of Chicago, I was always the odd one out in my family of overachievers. The Bennetts were locally famous. My father, Richard, was the chief surgeon at Maplewood Memorial Hospital. My mother, Catherine, taught constitutional law at Northwestern. And my older sister, Eleanor, was a mathematical prodigy who'd been accepted to MIT at 16. Our family photo albums were stuffed with certificates, trophies, and newspaper clippings celebrating their accomplishments. Then there was me, dreamy, creative Olivia, who preferred sketching designs in her notebook to solving equations or memorizing anatomical terms. I wasn't unintelligent. I maintained a solid B average throughout school. But in the Bennett household, anything less than exceptional was considered mediocre. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia has her head in the clouds again. My mother would sigh whenever she caught me doodling during study time. You know, dear, your sister had already published a research paper by your age. Those comparisons followed me everywhere like an unwelcome shadow. Family dinners were especially excruciating. My father would beam with pride over Eleanor's latest academic achievement, while my mother would pepper me with questions about college applications to prestigious pre-med programs. When I'd try to steer the conversation toward my passion for fashion design, they'd exchange that look, the one that said, "Just humor her until she comes to her senses." During my junior year of high school, I entered a statewide young designers competition. I spent months sketching, sourcing materials, and sewing late into the night, creating a collection that merged vintage silhouettes with modern, sustainable fabrics. To my amazement and delight, I placed second out of over 300 contestants. The awards ceremony fell on the same weekend as Eleanor's graduate school commencement. There was never any question about which event my parents would attend. "You understand, don't you, Olivia?" my mother said, not really asking. "This is such an important milestone for your sister." I nodded and pretended it didn't hurt, accepting my silver medal in a half-empty auditorium, scanning the crowd for faces that wouldn't appear. When I returned home, my award certificate sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before being tucked away in a drawer, while Eleanor's diploma was immediately framed and hung in the living room's wall of achievements, a shrine to Bennett, family excellence that somehow never included any of my accomplishments. My fashion sketches and design ideas filled notebook after notebook, hidden away in my bedroom like secret treasures. My parents saw my passion as a phase, something I'd eventually outgrow when reality set in. "It's a cutthroat industry," my father would remind me. "For every successful designer, thousands struggle in obscurity. We just want security for you." Olivia. The only person who seemed to understand was my grandmother, Evelyn, my father's mother, who had been a seamstress in her youth before marrying my grandfather. During summer visits to her cozy apartment in downtown Chicago, she would let me rummage through her sewing supplies, teaching me stitching techniques that had been passed down through generations. "You have a gift," Grandma Evelyn told me one afternoon as I showed her my latest designs. "And gifts aren't meant to be buried. They're meant to be shared with the world." She revealed that she had once dreamed of starting her own tailoring business, but had set it aside to raise her family. "Times were different then," she explained, her eyes distant with memories. "Women were expected to choose between career and family. But you, my dear Olivia, you live in a time of possibilities. Don't let anyone convince you that you must choose only one path." Grandma Evelyn became my confidant, my cheerleader, my safe harbor in the storm of family expectations. When I graduated high school, she gave me a gift that changed everything: her vintage Singer sewing machine and a check for $5,000. "This is your chance fund," she said, pressing the check into my palm. "Use it when you're ready to leap." My parents had other plans. They'd already decided I would attend state university, majoring in business administration. a practical degree that could lead to a real career. To keep the peace, and because I lacked the confidence to forge my own path just yet, I agreed. College was a strange mix of obligation and discovery. While I dutifully attended marketing classes and economics lectures, I also signed up for every available elective in fashion design, textile science, and art history. I joined the campus fashion club and organized our annual showcase, transforming it from a small student exhibition to an event that attracted local boutique owners and fashion enthusiasts from neighboring towns. During my sophomore year, something unexpected happened. A friend in my dorm was struggling to find an affordable yet stylish dress for her sister's wedding. On a whim, I offered to design something for her. Working evenings and weekends, I created a flowing maxi dress with delicate embroidery that perfectly suited her body type and the wedding's garden theme. When she posted photos on social media, my inbox exploded. Suddenly, classmates were asking if I could design custom pieces for them too. Formal events, job interviews, first dates. What began as occasional favors for friends evolved into a side business I called Designed by Olivia. I converted half of my tiny apartment into a makeshift studio, using Grandma Evelyn's sewing machine and reinvesting every dollar I earned into better materials. Between classes and homework, I would sketch designs, source fabrics, and sew until my fingers cramped. My parents remained oblivious to this growing venture. During our weekly phone calls, they'd ask about my business classes and internship prospects, and I'd give vague answers that satisfied them without revealing my true focus. I wasn't ready for their dismissal, not when my confidence was still so fragile. By senior year, I was making enough from my custom designs to consider pursuing fashion full-time after graduation. But then my father called with wonderful news. He'd secured me an interview at a prestigious consulting firm in Chicago through a golf buddy. It was a foot in the door to a real career with advancement opportunities. The expectation was clear. I would take the interview, accept the inevitable offer, and begin my ascent up the corporate ladder like a proper Bennett. When I hesitantly mentioned that I might want to explore other options, my father's voice turned cold. "Olivia, it's time to put childish things aside. Do you have any idea how many strings I pulled to get you this opportunity? How many qualified candidates would kill for this position?" I took the interview. I accepted the job. I packed away my sewing machine and design portfolios, tucking my dreams into storage along with them. The consulting firm, Parker & Associates, was everything I'd feared. Sterile office spaces, endless spreadsheets, and meetings that drained my soul one PowerPoint slide at a time. I performed adequately, meeting expectations without exceeding them, existing in a perpetual state of quiet, desperation. Each evening, I'd return to my small Chicago apartment and sketch designs that would never become reality. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Each weekend, I'd dutifully appear at family dinners where my parents would proudly introduce me as our daughter, the business consultant, while Eleanor dazzled everyone with stories from her research lab. 6 months into this gray existence, Grandma Evelyn was hospitalized with pneumonia. I visited her daily, bringing her homemade soup and keeping her company through long hospital nights. During one of these vigils, she fixed me with a knowing gaze. "You're not happy, are you, my dear?" The simple question broke something inside me. Tears I'd been holding back for months flowed freely as I confessed my misery, my abandoned dreams, my fear of disappointing my family. Grandma Evelyn listened, her weathered hand holding mine. When I finished, she said simply, "The greatest disappointment in life is not failing at something you love, but succeeding at something you hate." 2 days later, she passed peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, amid the grief, I made a silent promise to her and to myself. I would honor her belief in me. I would reclaim my passion. That weekend, I unearthed my sewing machine from storage and set it up in my living room. I created a simple website and revived my Designed by Olivia brand on social media. I reached out to former clients from college, offering to create new pieces for them. For 6 months, I lived a double life: corporate consultant by day, fashion, designer by night and weekend. I operated on minimal sleep and maximum coffee, building my business in the margins of a life I didn't want. The breaking point came when I received an email from a popular lifestyle blogger who had seen one of my designs at a charity event. She wanted to feature my work in an upcoming post about emerging designers. This was the opportunity I'd been dreaming of, but it required an interview and photo shoot during business hours. That night, I drafted my resignation letter to Parker & Associates. It was time to leap, and Grandma Evelyn's gift would be my safety net while I built my business. My parents were predictably dismayed. "You're throwing away a perfectly good career for a hobby," my mother said when I called to tell them. My father was more direct. "When this fashion fantasy inevitably fails, don't expect us to bail you out." The first year was brutal. I converted my entire apartment into a studio, sleeping on a futon that doubled as a client seating area during consultations. I learned digital marketing through YouTube tutorials, building my online presence between sewing sessions. I tracked every expense in meticulous spreadsheets, stretching Grandma Evelyn's gift as far as it would go. Slowly, painfully, my business grew. The blogger's feature brought new clients. Wedding commissions, my most profitable designs, increased through word of mouth. A local boutique agreed to carry a small collection of my ready-to-wear pieces, which sold out within weeks. When my lease expired, I took a calculated risk and rented a small storefront with a studio in the back and a tiny apartment upstairs. Designed by Olivia now had a physical presence in Chicago's emerging West Town neighborhood. 2 years into my business, I hired my first employee, a recent fashion school graduate who handled basic alterations and customer service, while I focused on design and production. 6 months later, I added a social media manager. My online sales began to outpace in-person transactions as my reputation spread beyond Chicago. Throughout this growth, my relationship with my family remained strained. Holiday gatherings were exercises in polite distance. They'd ask cursory questions about my little shop before turning to Eleanor's groundbreaking research or my father's hospital achievements. I stopped trying to make them understand. Instead, I channeled my energy into building something they couldn't dismiss. I developed a sustainable business model, focusing on bespoke wedding attire and limited edition seasonal collections that used eco-friendly materials. I collaborated with local artists to create unique textile prints that became my signature. By the 4th year, Designed by Olivia had been featured in 3 national fashion magazines. My team had grown to 8 full-time employees. We'd moved to a larger location in Wicker Park, and I'd launched an e-commerce platform that shipped my designs across the country. My financials, once a source of constant anxiety, now showed consistent profit margins that would impress even the most hard-nosed investor. Yet at family gatherings, I remained Olivia who makes dresses rather than Olivia the successful entrepreneur. I stopped sharing business milestones when they were met with patronizing smiles rather than genuine interest. Then came the Thanksgiving that changed everything. My sister Eleanor had recently accepted a prestigious research position at Johns Hopkins, which meant this would be her last holiday in Chicago before moving to Baltimore. My mother planned an elaborate Thanksgiving dinner, inviting extended family and my parents' closest friends to celebrate Eleanor's achievement. I arrived at my parents' house carrying a bottle of wine and a knot of resignation in my stomach. The usual dynamics were already in play. Eleanor holding court in the living room, describing her upcoming research project to an admiring audience. My father beaming with paternal pride. My mother introducing her as our daughter, the brilliant scientist. When I entered, the perfunctory greetings followed. "Olivia, dear, you look tired," my mother observed, leading me toward the kitchen. "Still keeping up with that boutique of yours?" Throughout appetizers and into the main course, the conversation revolved around medicine, academic achievements, and Eleanor's bright future. My cousin Taylor, who had recently completed his MBA, was peppered with questions about his new position at a venture capital firm. My Aunt Susan proudly announced that her son had been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools. Then my Uncle Robert, always slightly tipsy by the time turkey was served, turned his attention to me. "So, Olivia," he said, refilling his wine glass, "still playing dress-up for a living? When are you going to get a real job like the rest of the family?" The table erupted in chuckles. Even Eleanor, who usually stayed neutral in these moments, smiled behind her napkin. "Leave her be, Robert," my father said, though his tone was more indulgent than defensive. "Not everyone is cut out for academic rigor or corporate success. Olivia has always marched to her own drummer." My mother patted my hand sympathetically. "She's happy with her little shop, and that's what matters. Not everyone needs to change the world or make their mark in history." In that moment, something shifted inside me. Years of diminishment crystallized into a single clarifying realization. They would never see me, truly see me, unless I forced them to. I set down my fork, took a slow sip of water, and smiled. "Actually, I have some news I've been meaning to share," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Designed by Olivia was just valued at $1. $5 million after our last quarter showed $750,000 in revenue. We're opening our second location in New York next spring, and Vogue included my bridal collection in their Designers to Watch issue last month. The silence that followed was absolute. Forks suspended midair, wine glasses halted halfway to lips, wide eyes fixed on me as though I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "I've just signed a licensing agreement with Nordstrom to carry my ready-to-wear line in 12 locations nationwide," I continued into the silence. "And that little shop now employs 15 people full-time with comprehensive health benefits and profit sharing." I pulled out my phone and opened the digital version of the Vogue article, sliding it across the table to my Uncle Robert. "Here's the feature, if you're interested in my dress-up business." My father recovered first, clearing his throat. "Olivia, why haven't you told us any of this?" I met his gaze directly. "I've tried, Dad, for years. But you and Mom were always more interested in Eleanor's achievements than mine." After a while, I stopped sharing. My mother's expression shifted from shock to confusion to the beginning edges of pride. "But how did you build all this? Without any business experience? Without our help?" "I used what you taught me," I said, surprising myself with the realization. Dad's work ethic, Mom's attention to detail, Eleanor's analytical approach to problems. I just applied those lessons to something I actually love. Eleanor leaned forward, genuinely curious for perhaps the first time. "You're really in Vogue? Like, the actual magazine?" I nodded. "Page 38. They called my sustainable wedding collection revolutionary and boundary pushing." "That's incredibly impressive, Liv," she said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. The dynamic in the room had shifted palpably. My aunts and uncles, who had always treated me with benign condescension, now looked at me with newfound respect. My cousin Taylor, the MBA, was peppering me with questions about my business model and growth strategy. But the most profound change was in my parents. My father's expression had transformed from patronizing tolerance to genuine interest. My mother kept glancing between me and the Vogue article now being passed around the table, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. "Why didn't you come to us for startup capital?" my father asked. "We could have helped you." "Because you didn't believe in me," I said simply. "You always saw my passion as a hobby, not a viable career. I needed to prove you wrong, but more importantly, I needed to prove myself right." The remainder of dinner unfolded in a strange, new reality where I was suddenly the center of attention. Not as the family disappointment, but as a success story they hadn't seen coming. My uncle Robert, who had triggered this revelation, now couldn't stop telling everyone at the table that he'd always known Olivia had a good head for business. After dessert, my father pulled me aside in his study. On his desk, I noticed he'd opened my company's website on his computer. "I owe you an apology, Olivia," he said, his voice unusually humble. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment by steering you toward a conventional path. I never imagined you would build something so impressive on your own terms." "I'm still the same person I've always been, Dad," I replied. "I just finally found the courage to be that person fully." As we rejoined the family for coffee, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The validation I'd unconsciously sought for years suddenly seemed less important than the pride I felt in what I'd built, with or without their approval. When it was time to leave, my mother hugged me longer than usual. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. "She always was," I replied, even when no one else could see it. In the months that followed that Thanksgiving, my relationship with my family evolved. My father started sending me articles about fashion industry trends and sustainable business practices. My mother asked for a tour of my studio and actually listened as I explained my design process. Eleanor and I began a tentative but genuine friendship built on mutual respect rather than comparison. Today, Designed by Olivia has grown beyond anything I could have imagined during those early days of sewing in my college apartment. We have 4 locations across the country, an international e-commerce platform, and a team of 40 talented individuals who share my vision for ethical, sustainable fashion. In my office hangs a framed photo of Grandma Evelyn standing proudly in front of the tailoring shop where she once worked, alongside her vintage Singer sewing machine, now a cherished display piece rather than a working tool. Beside it is a simple handwritten note in her elegant script: "Gifts aren't meant to be buried." I no longer need my family's validation to feel successful or worthy. But there's a special sweetness in watching my father proudly show his golf buddies the magazine features about my latest collection, or hearing my mother tell her friends about her daughter, the innovative entrepreneur. Sometimes the greatest achievement isn't proving others wrong, it's giving yourself permission to be right. As winter descended on Chicago, I found myself navigating unfamiliar territory, a new relationship with my family based on respect rather than tolerance. The revelation of my business success at Thanksgiving had altered something fundamental in our dynamic. My phone buzzed more frequently with texts from my mother asking genuine questions about my upcoming collections. My father had taken to sending me articles about female entrepreneurs with notes saying, "Reminded me of you." It was strange and somewhat disorienting, this newfound interest. Part of me welcomed it. Wasn't this what I'd always wanted? Yet another part remained wary, protective of the independent life I'd built without their validation. I'd spent years steeling myself against their dismissal, and now I didn't quite know how to lower those defenses. December brought an unexpected invitation. My father asked if I would give a presentation about entrepreneurship to his hospital's administrative team during their annual retreat. "They're always bringing in consultants from big firms," he explained over the phone, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "But I thought they could learn something valuable from someone who built a successful business from scratch." I agreed, though not without trepidation. Public speaking had never been my forte. I preferred expressing myself through fabrics and designs rather than words. But the opportunity to share my journey with my father's colleagues, to be presented as an expert rather than a disappointment, was too meaningful to decline. The day of the presentation arrived with a blanket of fresh snow covering the city. I dressed carefully in one of my own designs, a charcoal gray pantsuit with subtle hand-embroidered details at the lapels, projecting both creativity and professionalism. As I gathered my materials, my phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. "Knock 'em dead today, Liv. Dad hasn't stopped talking about this presentation all week." The hospital's conference center was intimidating. All sleek glass and polished surfaces, filled with accomplished medical professionals in crisp white coats and tailored business wear. My father met me in the lobby, looking unusually nervous, as he introduced me to his colleagues. "This is my daughter, Olivia Bennett," he said, resting his hand briefly on my shoulder. "CEO of Designed by Olivia." He said the title with such gravity, such respect, that I almost didn't recognize myself in his description. This was new. Being introduced not as my younger daughter or Eleanor's sister, but as a professional in my own right. When I took the podium, facing a room of 50 expectant faces, my prepared notes suddenly seemed inadequate. Instead, I set them aside and spoke from the heart about passion as a business advantage, about finding market niches through authentic connection, about building a company culture that reflected personal values rather than industry standards. I shared stories of early failures, wholesale accounts that fell through, a disastrous first attempt at expanding too quickly, inventory miscalculations that had me working through Christmas to fulfill orders. But I also spoke of breakthroughs, the moment I realized sustainability could be my brand's cornerstone. The viral social media post that brought our website down for 2 days due to traffic. The first time I saw a stranger on Michigan Avenue, wearing one of my designs. Throughout my presentation, I kept catching glimpses of my father in the back row. He wasn't checking his phone or whispering to colleagues as he typically did during presentations. He was watching me intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling. It was the same expression he'd worn at Eleanor's academic conferences, pure, unfiltered pride. When I finished speaking, the applause was generous, the questions thoughtful and engaged. As the room cleared afterward, several department heads lingered to exchange business cards and continue conversations. The chief of cardiology's wife commissioned a mother-of-the-bride dress on the spot. My father waited until everyone had left before approaching the podium. For a moment, we stood in awkward silence, still navigating this new terrain of mutual respect. "You were remarkable," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been giving presentations in this room for 20 years, and I've never held their attention like you did today." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, busying myself with gathering my materials to hide the unexpected tears pricking at my eyes. "Olivia," he began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to know that I was wrong. For a long time, I measured success by a very narrow standard: degrees, titles, institutions. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward what I understood. But today, watching you speak with such confidence and seeing how these accomplished people responded to you, I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize the extraordinary person you've become." It was the apology I'd never expected to receive, delivered in the setting where my father felt most himself, his hospital, surrounded by the trappings of the career that had defined him. Perhaps that's why it felt so genuine, so complete. He was meeting me on my terms while standing firmly on his own ground. Our embrace was brief but meaningful, a bridge across years of misunderstanding. As we walked to the parking garage together, he asked about my expansion plans, listening intently as I explained the challenges of the New York retail market. Before we parted, he pressed a business card into my hand, not his own, but that of a former patient who owned several commercial properties in Manhattan. "He owes me a favor," my father said with a small smile. "At least let him show you some options before you sign a lease." It was a gesture that spoke volumes, not taking over or imposing his will, but offering a connection, acknowledging my autonomy while extending genuine help. For the first time, he was treating me as a fellow professional rather than a child in need of guidance. The winter months brought unexpected growth to Designed by Olivia. A prominent bridal magazine featured our sustainable wedding collection, resulting in a flood of orders that necessitated hiring 3 additional seamstresses. The New York location planning progressed smoothly, thanks in part to the connection my father had provided, who helped me secure a dream space in Chelsea at slightly below market rate. My mother, not to be outdone in this new chapter of parental support, offered to host a launch party for the New York store opening, leveraging her academic connections to invite fashion journalists and influencers. It was surreal watching her throw herself into event planning with the same meticulous attention she'd once reserved for Eleanor's achievement celebrations. I want to make sure people understand the intellectual underpinnings of your sustainable approach, she explained while reviewing the invitation list. It's not just fashion, it's a philosophy, an ethical stance. That deserves serious consideration. I recognized this for what it was. My mother translating my work into terms that resonated with her value system, finding a way to connect with my world through the lens of her own. She was trying, in her way, to bridge the gap between us. Eleanor, meanwhile, had developed a genuine interest in my business after the Thanksgiving revelation. During her visits home from Baltimore, she would stop by my studio, asking thoughtful questions about production workflows and efficiency metrics. "You know," she said during one such visit, examining a complicated pattern-cutting process, "you could probably optimize this with the right algorithm. I have a colleague who specializes in computational applications for manufacturing processes." 2 weeks later, she sent me a custom software program that reduced our pattern waste by nearly 15%. It was her way of showing support, not through conventional sisterly affection, but through problem-solving and practical contribution to my success. As spring approached and the New York store opening loomed, I found myself reflecting on this transformation in my family relationships. The validation I'd craved for so long had finally arrived, yet it felt different than I'd imagined. There was satisfaction, certainly, but also a bittersweet recognition of the years lost to misunderstanding. And beneath it all, a nagging question. Would they have ever seen my worth if my business hadn't achieved conventional financial success? One evening in early April, as I worked late at the studio finalizing designs for our summer collection, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Marcus Jennings, executive editor of Entrepreneur magazine. "We're doing a feature on unlikely success stories for our June issue," he explained. "Your name came up repeatedly in our research as someone who built something extraordinary outside traditional business paths. We'd like to include you." The interview was scheduled for the following week, an in-depth profile, including a photo shoot, at my Chicago flagship store. As I prepared, selecting designs to showcase and rehearsing my company's origin story, I found myself struggling with how to frame my family's role in my journey. Should I omit the years of dismissal and focus only on their recent support? Should I paint them as antagonists overcome by my perseverance? Neither felt entirely honest or fair. The morning of the interview, I arrived early to ensure the studio was perfectly arranged. As I adjusted a mannequin displaying our best-selling sustainable cocktail dress, I noticed a familiar figure reflected in the storefront window. Grandma, Evelyn, watching me with quiet pride from a framed photo on my desk. What would she advise in this moment? Her words echoed in my memory. "The truth, told with compassion, is always the right choice." When the journalist arrived with his photographer, I welcomed them into my creative space and answered questions about fabrics, design inspiration, and business challenges. Eventually, the conversation turned personal. "Our research indicates you come from a family of high achievers in academia and medicine," the journalist noted. "How did they react to your decision to pursue fashion design instead of a more conventional path?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. My family values excellence and impact. For a long time, they couldn't see how those values might manifest in creative entrepreneurship. Their understanding of success was shaped by their own experiences and limited to paths they recognized. It took time, and yes, commercial success, for them to understand that I was applying the same drive for excellence they instilled in me, just in a different arena. "And how are things with them now?" he prompted. "We're learning to speak each other's languages," I replied. "They're making efforts to understand my world, and I'm trying to see how their early concerns, however limiting, came from a place of care. The relationships are still evolving, but they're built on a more authentic foundation now." It wasn't the dramatic redemption arc the magazine might have wanted, nor was it the complete absolution my parents might have preferred. It was the complicated truth, told with the compassion Grandma Evelyn would have advocated. The New York store opening in May became an unexpected family affair. My father arrived 2 days early to help with final preparations, revealing a surprising talent for spatial organization as he rearranged display racks for optimal customer flow. My mother charmed fashion journalists with her articulate explanations of our sustainable manufacturing processes, framing them within larger ecological and ethical contexts. Eleanor, flying in from Baltimore despite a busy research schedule, created an impromptu data visualization of our carbon footprint reduction to display near the entrance. As I watched them move through the crowded space, genuine enthusiasm replacing the perfunctory support I'd grown accustomed to, I realized that what had changed wasn't just their perception of me, but also my willingness to welcome them into my world without condition or resentment. The evening culminated in a toast, my father raising his glass to address the gathered crowd of fashion industry insiders, local media, and early customers. I tensed slightly, unsure what he might say, still carrying the muscle memory of past disappointments. "When Olivia was 8 years old," he began, she reconstructed her mother's silk scarf into a remarkably sophisticated dress for her doll. Instead of seeing the creativity in this act, we focused on the ruined scarf. He paused, meeting my gaze across the room. It was the first of many times we failed to recognize the visionary in our midst. We measured success by familiar yardsticks, missing the innovation before us. He gestured to the store around us, to the sustainable luxury designs displayed on reclaimed wood fixtures. But Olivia never needed our recognition to know her own worth. She built this remarkable company not because of our support, but despite its absence. That speaks to a strength of character and clarity of vision that goes beyond conventional achievement. His voice softened. "As a surgeon, I've spent my career learning to see things clearly. Yet I failed to see what was most obvious, that my daughter's path to excellence simply looked different from my own. I'm grateful that she's given us the chance to celebrate with her today, even though we arrived very late to the party." The room filled with warm applause, but I barely heard it. I was too busy processing this public acknowledgement of our complicated history, this unvarnished admission of his failure to see me. It wasn't just an apology. It was a complete reversal of the narrative that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. Later that night, after the guests had departed and we were closing up the new store, my mother lingered, helping me gather empty champagne flutes and straighten cushions on the trying room benches. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she said quietly, running her fingers over a rack of evening wear. "She always said you had a gift we couldn't understand." "She believed in me when no one else did," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice entirely. My mother nodded, accepting the implicit criticism without defensiveness. "Evelyn could see things the rest of us couldn't. She used to tell me I was looking at you through the wrong lens, that I needed to adjust my focus." She placed a final glass on the tray. I wish I'd listened sooner. "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question that had lingered for years finally finding voice. My mother was silent for a long moment, arranging and rearranging the glasses. "Fear," she finally said. "Pure, simple fear. Your father and I came from nothing, built our careers through relentless work and sacrifice. The paths we chose had clear metrics for success, established securities. We thought we were protecting you from uncertainty. She looked up, her eyes glistening. We confused safety with happiness, security with fulfillment. By the time we realized our mistake, you'd already proven us wrong in the most magnificent way. It wasn't a complete explanation, nor a perfect excuse, but it was honest, vulnerable in a way my always composed mother rarely allowed herself to be. It opened a door to understanding that had previously been closed. As summer turned to fall, my business continued to flourish, with the New York location exceeding projections and a capsule collection collaboration with a major department store in development. But the most significant growth was happening in less quantifiable areas, in relationships restored, in personal confidence solidified, in the quiet knowledge that my worth had never actually depended on external validation. September brought an unexpected invitation. My alma mater wanted me to speak at their business school about entrepreneurship and creative industries. The irony wasn't lost on me. Returning as a success story to the institution where I dutifully pursued a business degree while secretly building the foundation of my company. The lecture hall was packed with students, faculty, and to my surprise, my entire family seated in the front row. As I shared my journey, the false starts, the failures, the pivotal decisions, the eventual breakthroughs, I found myself emphasizing not just the business strategies that had led to financial success, but the emotional resilience required to pursue a vision others couldn't yet see. Your path may not make sense to the people who love you most, I told the room full of aspiring entrepreneurs. They might measure your choices against conventional standards and find them wanting. That doesn't mean you're wrong, it might just mean you're early, seeing possibilities that aren't yet visible to others. I noticed my father nodding in the front row, my mother wiping a discreet tear. Success isn't just measured in revenue or growth metrics, I continued. It's measured in alignment, in building something that reflects your genuine values and vision, something that would still hold meaning for you even if the external validation never came. During the Q&A session that followed, a young woman, in worn jeans and a vintage t-shirt, stood up. My parents think my fashion design major is a waste of time and money, she said, her voice slightly trembling. They're threatening to stop helping with tuition unless I switch to something practical. How did you handle that kind of opposition? The room fell silent. My family tensed visibly in the front row, clearly recognizing themselves in her story. I could have sidestepped the question, offered some diplomatic non-answer. Instead, I thought of Grandma Evelyn's guidance, the truth, told with compassion. I wish I could tell you it doesn't matter what they think, but the truth is, it does hurt when the people you love don't believe in your vision, I answered. I spent years trying to prove my family wrong, which gave them more power over my choices than they deserved. I paused, looking directly at my parents, including them in this moment of honesty. What I eventually learned is that proving yourself right is more important than proving others wrong. Build your skills relentlessly. Find mentors who understand your field. Create even when no one is watching or appreciating. Document your progress so you can see your own growth. The student nodded, jotting notes. And remember this, I added. People can only see possibilities they've been exposed to or can imagine. Your parents' concerns likely come from love filtered through limited perspective. You might need to be your own primary believer for a while, but if you stay true to your vision and build something authentic, some minds can change. I smiled at my family, even the most stubborn ones. After the lecture, as students clustered around asking follow-up questions and sharing their entrepreneurial dreams, I watched my parents engaging with the young woman who had asked about family opposition. My father was showing her something on his phone, likely articles about successful fashion entrepreneurs, his new favorite reading material. My mother was writing something in the young woman's notebook, her expression earnest and encouraging. They were offering this stranger the support they had once withheld from me, perhaps trying to rewrite a story that couldn't be changed but could be learned from. It was an imperfect redemption, but a genuine one. Later that evening, my family, gathered at my loft for dinner. A rare occasion with all of us in the same city at the same time. As we shared a meal around my dining table, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, touching on my upcoming collections, Eleanor's research breakthroughs, my father's hospital expansion, my mother's latest publication. During a lull in the conversation, Eleanor raised her glass unexpectedly. "To Olivia," she said, "who taught our family that excellence comes in forms we didn't recognize, and success has definitions we hadn't considered." "To Olivia," my parents echoed, their eyes warm with an emotion that looked remarkably like admiration. As I accepted their toast, I realized that the vindication I'd sought at that fateful Thanksgiving dinner had evolved into something more meaningful than simply proving my worth. It had become about expanding our collective definition of value and achievement, about creating space for different kinds of excellence within our family narrative. The journey from dismissed to respected hadn't been linear or simple. The hurt of those early years hadn't magically disappeared with the revelation of my business success. But something new was growing in its place, a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who we had expected each other to be. On my studio wall hangs a shadow box containing 2 items: Grandma Evelyn's ornate fabric scissors that had started me on this path, and beside them a framed note card from the place setting at that transformative Thanksgiving dinner. I'd kept it as a reminder not of my family's dismissal, but of the moment I'd finally stopped measuring my worth through their eyes. The card is displayed with its blank side facing outward. What matters isn't the label they had once given me, but the identity I had defined for myself, on my own terms, through my own vision, with the quiet confidence Grandma Evelyn had always believed I possessed. Prosperity hadn't changed who I was. It had simply made visible to others what had always been there: a woman who transformed fabric into art, obstacles into opportunities, and eventually, misunderstanding into mutual respect. The autumn air in New York carried a distinctive crispness as I hurried down Fifth Avenue, dodging tourists and locals alike, late for a meeting that could change everything for Designed by Olivia. The Chelsea location had exceeded all expectations during its first quarter, and now an opportunity had emerged that I hadn't dared dream of. A potential investor wanted to discuss taking my brand international. The coffee shop where we'd arranged to meet was tucked away on a side street, away from the main hustle of Manhattan. I'd chosen it deliberately. Neutral territory with excellent espresso and enough ambient noise to ensure privacy without shouting. As I pushed through the door, scanning for my appointment, I was startled to see a familiar face already seated in the corner booth. "Eleanor? What are you doing here?" I asked, approaching my sister with confusion. She was supposed to be in Baltimore, deep in research at Johns Hopkins. She looked up from her laptop with an enigmatic smile. "Surprise! I'm your potential investor." I slid into the booth across from her, setting down my portfolio with a thud. "That's not funny. I have an actual meeting with Hudson Capital Partners in 20 minutes? "No, you don't," Eleanor replied, turning her laptop to face me. On the screen was a company profile for Quantum Venture Fund, with Olivia Bennett listed as managing partner. Hudson Capital is a shell corporation I use for initial contacts. I wanted to meet with you as a potential investment first, not as your sister. I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. "You're a venture capitalist? Since when? What about your research position?" Eleanor sipped her coffee calmly. "I've been investing for years. Started with my graduate school stipend, built a small fund, and expanded. Johns Hopkins is my passion, but this," she gestured to the laptop, "this is my business, and business has been very good." The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. While I'd been building my design empire, in fabric and thread, Eleanor had apparently been constructing a financial one in algorithms and market predictions. It seemed the Bennett drive for excellence manifested in ways even more varied than I'd imagined. "Why the secrecy?" I finally asked. And why are you interested in my company specifically? The secrecy is simple. I don't mix family and finance. As a rule, it complicates both. She closed her laptop. As for why your company, it's performing exceptionally well by any objective standard. Sustainable luxury fashion is projected for significant growth in European and Asian markets over the next decade. Your brand ethos resonates with high-value, demographic segments. The decision to explore investment opportunities with Designed by Olivia is purely data-driven. Just business, then, I said, feeling strangely disappointed. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Well, not entirely. I've watched you build something remarkable from nothing but determination and vision. That carries weight beyond the balance sheets. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder. I've prepared a preliminary valuation and expansion proposal. Take it home, review it with your team and advisors. No family pressure, no favors either way. If we do this, it will be a proper business arrangement or nothing at all. I took the folder, still processing this new dimension of my sister. Not just the brilliant scientist our parents had championed, but a shrewd business mind who had built a parallel career in silence. Does Dad know about your investment business? I asked. Eleanor shook her head. Not the full extent. He knows I dabble in the market. Mom suspects more but doesn't ask details. Some family dynamics are better left undisturbed. As we parted ways on the sidewalk outside, Eleanor heading to a meeting uptown and I to my Chelsea store, she paused. Whatever you decide about the proposal, I'm proud of what you've built, Olivia. Not because it's financially successful, though it certainly is, but because it's authentically yours. Not many people have the courage to create something that truly reflects their vision. The compliment, delivered with typical Eleanor precision but uncharacteristic warmth, stayed with me through the crowded subway ride to Chelsea. My sister, always the family standard bearer for achievement, had just acknowledged my path as valid, even admirable. And she'd done so not as a consolation, but as a professional assessment from someone who apparently evaluated business ventures for a living. Upon reaching the store, I found my New York manager, Zoe, dealing with an unexpected delivery issue. Our latest shipment of organic fabrics from Italy had been delayed at customs. As we problem-solved, reworking production schedules and contacting suppliers, I found myself grateful for the immediate practical concerns that prevented me from diving into Eleanor's proposal right away. This development warranted careful consideration, not an impulsive response. That evening, alone in my rented apartment overlooking the Highline Park, I finally opened Eleanor's folder. The contents were comprehensive and meticulously prepared. Financial, projections, market analysis, expansion timelines, and a proposed investment structure that would provide significant capital while leaving me with controlling interest. It was, objectively speaking, an excellent offer, crafted with both business acumen and surprising sensitivity to my desire for creative autonomy. I set it aside and called the one person whose perspective I trusted implicitly on matters of both business and family, Aunt Rebecca, my father's younger sister who had forged her own path when family expectations became too constraining. After a brief catch-up, I explained Eleanor's surprise appearance and investment proposal. "Well, that's certainly unexpected," Aunt Rebecca said, her voice warm through the phone line. "Though perhaps it shouldn't be. You Bennetts never do anything halfway, do you? One builds a fashion empire, another a venture capital fund. Meanwhile, the rest of us mere mortals are just trying to remember to water our houseplants." I laughed, grateful for her ability to bring perspective to situations that felt overwhelming. "The proposal is solid. Better than solid, actually. It would allow me to open locations in London and Tokyo within 18 months, expand our online presence significantly, and develop the sustainable textile research I've been wanting to pursue." "But," Rebecca prompted, hearing the hesitation in my voice, But it would mean intertwining my business with family again after I've worked so hard to establish independence. What if it goes wrong? What if business disagreements reopen old wounds? What if it works beautifully and creates a new dimension to your relationship? She countered. Olivia, you've already done the hardest part. You've built something authentic on your own terms and earned respect in the process. This decision isn't about proving anything anymore. It's about what serves your vision best. I thanked her for the insight and promised to visit soon, then spent the remainder of the evening reviewing Eleanor's proposal with fresh eyes. By midnight, I'd drafted a detailed response, accepting the investment with several carefully considered modifications to the terms. I would maintain full creative control, we would establish clear protocols for handling potential conflicts, and a portion of the expansion funding would be allocated specifically to developing a fashion design scholarship program for economically disadvantaged students. Eleanor's response arrived by email before dawn, accepting all modifications with a single additional note. The scholarship program will need a name. May I suggest the Olivia Bennett Memorial Scholarship for Creative Excellence? Grandma would have appreciated the symmetry of her belief in you creating opportunities for others. The suggestion brought unexpected tears. Eleanor, always economical with sentiment, had found the perfect way to honor both our grandmother's memory and the journey her initial faith had sparked. I typed a simple reply. Perfect. Let's do this. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Legal teams drafted agreements, architects assessed potential properties in London's Covent Garden and Tokyo's Daikanyama district, and my design team began researching cultural influences for collections that would resonate in these new markets while maintaining our sustainable ethos. Though I'd expected the partnership with Eleanor to be challenging, knowing both our strong personalities and different approaches to problem solving, I found myself pleasantly surprised by the complementary nature of our skills. Her analytical precision balanced my creative intuition. My emotional intelligence smoothed interactions. Her direct approach sometimes complicated. We were developing a professional rapport that felt entirely new. Neither the competitive siblings of childhood, nor the awkwardly supportive adults of recent years, but genuine collaborators with mutual respect. My father, upon learning of Eleanor's investment and our international expansion plans, reacted with uncharacteristic speechlessness, followed by a burst of delighted laughter. My daughters, taking on the world together, he said during our video call, shaking his head in wonder. Who would have thought? My mother's reaction was more measured but equally supportive. Just promise me you'll incorporate appropriate contractual protections, she advised, the law professor emerging. Family dynamics have a way of complicating business arrangements if boundaries aren't clearly established. The London location, opened in spring, a former textile factory in Covent Garden thoughtfully renovated to honor its industrial heritage while showcasing our sustainable designs. Eleanor attended the launch event, impeccably dressed in one of my creations, a structured blazer in midnight blue with subtle geometric embroidery, and moved through the crowd of fashion editors and potential clients with surprising ease for someone who claimed to prefer laboratories to social gatherings. You're a natural at this, I remarked, finding her chatting with the fashion director of a major British magazine. It's just data collection in a different setting, she replied with a small smile. Though I will admit, your world is more visually appealing than mine. Less fluorescent lighting, more champagne. As the event wound down, we stood together by the expansive windows overlooking the London twilight, watching the city lights emerge against the darkening sky. Remember when you used to hide your design sketches whenever I came into your room? Eleanor asked suddenly. I nodded, surprised she'd noticed that childhood habit. I always assumed you'd find them frivolous. I was jealous, she admitted, still gazing out at the city. You had this clear passion, this thing that made your eyes light up. I had achievements and expectations, but nothing that felt so intrinsically mine. She turned to face me. The research, the academics, I excel at them, and there's satisfaction in that excellence. But the investment fund was my equivalent of your sketchbooks. Something just for me, something that wasn't an extension of what our parents mapped out. The confession startled me. I'd spent years assuming Eleanor had everything: the natural abilities, the parental approval, the clear path forward, while I struggled to be taken seriously. It had never occurred to me that she might have envied any aspect of my journey. Is that why you invested in my company? To find some connection to that kind of passion? I asked. She shook her head. I invested because it's a sound business decision, but I chose to reveal myself as the investor rather than maintaining anonymity because... She hesitated, uncharacteristically, searching for words. Because I wanted to be part of something authentic. Something built from genuine vision rather than external expectations. In that moment, standing in the London outpost of the brand I'd built from nothing but determination and thread, I realized that Eleanor and I had been running parallel journeys all along, both seeking to define success on our own terms while carrying the weight of family legacy and expectation. We'd simply chosen different paths for the journey. The Tokyo store opening 3 months later brought a surprise I hadn't anticipated. As I prepared for the launch event in my hotel room, a knock at the door revealed my parents, both of them. Having flown 14 hours to attend an occasion they once would have dismissed as trivial. We couldn't miss this, my mother explained, embracing me with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. Our daughter opening an international location? It's extraordinary. My father, silver-haired and distinguished in his tailored suit, surveyed the room with its view of the Tokyo skyline. Your grandmother once told me you would go further than any of us, he said quietly. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I do now. The launch event itself became a celebration not just of the brand's expansion, but of the Bennett family's evolution. My father, once so dismissive of my impractical passion, now proudly explained our sustainable production methods to Japanese business leaders. My mother engaged fashion editors in discussions about intellectual property protections for designers. Eleanor moved seamlessly between investor conversations and personal introductions, her analytical mind finding unexpected common ground with creative professionals. And I watched it all unfold with a sense of completion I hadn't known I was seeking. Not just professional success or family validation, but the integration of all parts of my life into a coherent whole. The passion that had once isolated me from my family had ultimately created new connections between us, new understanding and appreciation on all sides. After Tokyo, life settled into a new rhythm. I divided my time between our various locations, spending a week each month in London, Tokyo, and New York, before returning to Chicago for creative development and production oversight. Eleanor and I established a monthly strategy meeting, always in person despite our busy schedules, always beginning with business and inevitably ending with more personal conversations that slowly built a bridge across the distance of our earlier years. During one such meeting in Chicago, as autumn painted the city in rich golds and reds, Eleanor arrived with an unexpected request. I need a dress, she announced without preamble, setting down her laptop at our usual conference table. You have access to the entire collection, I replied, puzzled. Just take whatever you like. She shook her head. Not from the collection. I need something specific, something custom. I'm receiving the Bloomberg Innovation Award next month, and I want to wear something that tells a story. I gestured, for her to continue, intrigued by this uncharacteristic concern with appearance from my typically utilitarian sister. The investment strategies I've developed incorporate sustainability metrics in ways the industry hasn't prioritized before, she explained. I want what I wear to reflect that, to visually represent the integration of forward-thinking approaches with traditional finance. You want your dress to be a thesis statement, I summarized with a smile. Precisely, she nodded, completely serious. Can you do that? The request became a fascinating creative challenge. Over the next few weeks, in between managing our international expansion and developing the next season's collection, I sketched and refined a design specifically for Eleanor. The resulting dress was architecturally structured yet flowing, crafted from an innovative fabric developed through our sustainability research program, a material made from regenerated ocean plastic with the luxurious hand feel of fine silk. The night of the award ceremony, Eleanor sent me a photo from the event. She stood at the podium, poised and confident in the dress that perfectly embodied her professional ethos, accepting recognition for work that had long remained in the shadows. The accompanying text message was characteristically concise. "Your design communicated exactly what words couldn't. Thank you." That image, my sister wearing my creation to accept acknowledgement for her own hidden passion, became another turning point in our evolving relationship. We had moved beyond the competitive dynamic of our childhood and the tentative support of our early adulthood into something more meaningful: active celebration of each other's unique paths to excellence. The following spring brought another unexpected development when my father announced his early retirement from surgical practice. 30 years is enough, he declared during a family dinner at his and my mother's home. I've trained the next generation. Now I want to explore other interests while I still have the energy to enjoy them. These other interests turned out to include an unexpected passion for sustainable business practices. One morning, he arrived unannounced at my Chicago studio with a stack of research papers and case studies. "I've been reading about circular economy models in fashion," he announced, settling into a chair in my office as if this were a completely normal occurrence. "I think there might be applications here that you haven't fully explored." Thus began my father's unofficial role as sustainability research advisor to Designed by Olivia. The surgeon's precision and analytical mind that had once dismissed my creative pursuits now turned toward advancing them, bringing scientific rigor to our sustainability initiatives. He devoured industry research, connected me with materials, scientists from his medical network, and even developed a matrix for evaluating the environmental impact of various production methods. My mother, not to be outdone, began offering legal expertise on international intellectual property protections as our brand expanded globally. The constitutional law professor who had once hoped I would pursue a serious career now applied her considerable intellect to protecting the creative work I'd built. During a particularly challenging negotiation with a major department store chain interested in carrying our designs, my mother sat beside me at the conference table, her formidable reputation preceding her. When the executives attempted to insert unfavorable terms regarding design ownership, she calmly eviscerated their proposal with such legal precision that they actually apologized before presenting revised terms. "That was magnificent," I told her afterward as we shared a celebratory lunch. She smiled, a hint of the formidable litigator she'd once been showing through her professorial exterior. "I may not have understood your path initially, Olivia, but I've always believed in protecting what's valuable. Your creative vision is worth defending ferociously." The Bennett Memorial Scholarship for Creative Excellence launched that fall, providing full tuition and mentorship to 5 promising design students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The selection committee, which included both Eleanor and me, reviewed hundreds of applications, portfolios brimming with raw talent and determination that reflected my own early struggles. At the scholarship announcement event, held in our Chicago's year flagship store, I watched the recipients' faces as they realized their creative dreams had just become attainable. One young woman from Southside Chicago, whose designs incorporated cultural elements from her Mexican heritage, reminded me powerfully of myself at that age, hungry for opportunity, bursting with ideas, needing only the chance to prove her vision valid. "Your grandmother would have loved this," my father said quietly, standing beside me as we observed the scholarship recipients being photographed with their families. Creating pathways for others was always important to her. She created one for me, I replied. even if it took a while for everyone else to see where it led. He nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke without defensiveness. The greatest gift parents can give their children is the freedom to define success on their own terms. It just took your mother and me far too long to understand that. As Designed by Olivia approached its 10th year, with locations across 3 continents and a team of over 100 passionate employees, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had begun with a little girl hiding design sketches from critical eyes. The financial success, the $750K side business that had shocked my family that fateful Thanksgiving, had ultimately been less significant than the personal transformation it catalyzed. My family had changed, certainly. My parents had expanded. Their definition of achievement beyond the narrow academic and professional confines they'd once insisted upon. Eleanor and I had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than comparison and competition. But the most profound change had been within myself. The evolution from seeking external validation to recognizing my own inherent worth. From proving others wrong to confidently charting my authentic path. One crisp autumn evening, as golden light streamed through the windows of my Chicago studio, I discovered my father standing before the framed Thanksgiving place card I kept on my office wall, the blank side deliberately displayed outward. "I've always wondered what was written on the other side," he said without turning around. "Nothing worth remembering," I replied, joining him. He nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the greatest lesson in all of this. The labels others assign, us, even those who love us, don't define what we're capable of creating." He placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. "Thank you for teaching me that, Olivia. It was an education I didn't know I needed." As he turned to leave, I impulsively reached for the frame, removing the backing to extract the card. I handed it to him, finally allowing him to see the word written there in my mother's elegant script. Dreamer. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up with a smile of surprising warmth. "She wasn't entirely wrong, you know. You were a dreamer." He handed the card back to me. "You still are. You just happen to be the rarest kind. One with the determination to make those dreams reality." I returned the card to its frame, but this time with the word visible, no longer a painful reminder of dismissal, but a reclaimed identity, a badge of honor rather than a mark of judgment. Dreams, after all, had been the foundation of everything I'd built, the visions others couldn't see until I rendered them in fabric and determination. That evening, as I locked up the studio and headed home through the Twilight City streets, I felt a deep sense of completion. The journey from dismissed to vindicated, from underestimated to respected, had never really been about proving my worth to others. It had been about honoring the quiet voice within that had always known the true value of dreams, especially those that others are too limited to recognize. Some dreams, after all, aren't meant to be understood by everyone. They're meant to be pursued anyway, with the quiet confidence that comes from recognizing your own vision, even when it remains invisible to those around you. The true measure of success isn't in making others believe, but in never stopping believing in yourself. The 5th anniversary of our international expansion arrived with cherry blossoms in Tokyo, spring rain in London, and unexpected snowfall in Chicago. I stood at the window of my downtown penthouse, watching late April snow dust the city in a delicate white powder that would likely melt by noon. The weather seemed fitting for a day of reflection, an unexpected beauty layered over the familiar landscape, transforming everything while changing nothing fundamental. Designed by Olivia had evolved beyond anything I could have imagined that fateful Thanksgiving day, when my family first confronted the reality of my success. What had begun as a $750,000 side business, dismissed by those closest to me, had blossomed into a global enterprise valued at over $40 million. With flagship stores on 3 continents and a thriving online presence that had revolutionized sustainable luxury fashion. My phone chimed with a text from my assistant, Mia. The car would arrive in 30 minutes to take me to the airport, a private jet waiting to carry me to Milan for Fashion Week, where Designed by Olivia would debut our most ambitious collection. Yet, after Milan would come Paris, then back to Tokyo for the opening of our textile innovation laboratory. The international dance had become routine over the past few years. My life measured in flight hours and time zones rather than weekdays and weekends. Success at this level came with unexpected complexities. Magazines now listed me among the most influential figures in fashion. Business journals analyzed my leadership style and company culture. Fashion students wrote theses about my sustainable design philosophy. The shy girl who had once hidden sketches from critical eyes now found her name becoming shorthand for a particular approach to fashion: ethical, innovative, unapologetically feminine without sacrificing power. The most surreal aspect of this new reality was witnessing my family adapt to my public profile. My father, once dismissive of fashion as frivolous, now proudly shared articles about Designed by Olivia's innovations in biodegradable textiles with his former medical colleagues. My mother, who had pushed me toward practical career paths, now incorporated case studies about my company's intellectual property strategies into her law courses. Eleanor, my brilliant sister who had once overshadowed me in family esteem, now introduced herself at financial conferences as Olivia Bennett's sister and investment partner. The transformation was gratifying, certainly, but also carried a faint undercurrent of melancholy. Why had it required extraordinary success, the kind featured in Forbes and Women's Wear Daily, to earn the respect that should have been my birthright? Would my family have ever valued my passion had it remained modest in scale, fulfilling but not financially exceptional? These questions lingered as I packed my carry-on for Milan, selecting pieces from our latest collection to wear during the week's events. My phone rang. Eleanor calling from London, where she was attending an economic forum before joining me in Milan. "The advance press for the collection is outstanding," she said without preamble, her voice clear despite the distance. Vogue Italia is calling it revolutionary and boundary-defying. The sustainable fashion correspondent from Le Monde wants an exclusive interview. "That's excellent news," I replied, tucking a silk blouse into my suitcase. "How's the economic forum? Boring everyone with complex algorithms and market predictions?" She laughed, a sound that had become more frequent over the years of our business partnership. "Actually, I've been invited to speak on a panel about ethical investment strategies. Apparently, our work integrating sustainability metrics into financial models is causing quite a stir in traditional banking circles." "Look at us," I said, smiling into the phone. "The Bennett sisters, disrupting established industries and forcing old institutions to reconsider their assumptions. Who would have predicted that?" "Grandma Evelyn would have," Eleanor replied softly. "She always did see possibilities others missed." The mention of our grandmother sent my thoughts tumbling backward. In the whirlwind of global expansion and industry accolades, I sometimes lost sight of the journey's origins: a vintage Singer sewing machine, a $5,000 check, and the only person who had believed in my vision before I had evidence to support it. "I've been thinking," I said impulsively. "After Milan, let's take a detour before Tokyo. Let's go see Grandma's hometown in Minnesota, the little place she used to tell us about, where she learned to sew from her mother." Eleanor was quiet. For a moment, then, "Willowbrook. It was called Willowbrook." She said the main street had a general store with wooden barrels of penny candy. "You remember that?" I asked, surprised. Eleanor had always seemed less interested in Grandma's stories, more focused on her scientific texts and mathematical equations. "I remember everything she told us," my sister replied. "I just didn't know how to value it at the time." The simplicity of her admission touched something deep within me. Perhaps we had all been learning, in our own ways, to recognize and honor the legacy Grandma Evelyn had left us. Not just financial support or practical skills, but a philosophy of life that valued authenticity over conformity. passion over prestige. Willowbrook after Milan, then, I confirmed. I'll have Mia adjust the schedule. After hanging up, I finished packing with renewed purpose. This fashion week wasn't merely another industry event or business obligation. It represented a milestone in a journey that had begun long before I understood where it might lead. A path first illuminated by a grandmother who saw potential in her dreamy granddaughter when no one else did. The Milan show exceeded every expectation. Our collection, inspired by natural regenerative processes and featuring fabrics developed in our own laboratories from agricultural waste and reclaimed materials, received a standing ovation. Front. Row seats held fashion legends, sustainability advocates, and influential buyers from luxury markets worldwide. Eleanor sat among them, looking elegant and slightly out of place in her precisely tailored version of designer fashion, her analytical mind visibly processing the spectacle from a different angle than the industry insiders surrounding her. The after-party flowed with organic champagne and conversation that darted between Italian, French, and English. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about production timelines and distribution channels. Around midnight, I slipped away from the glittering gathering, changing from my couture gown into comfortable travel clothes. Eleanor met me at the hotel's private exit, similarly dressed for practicality rather than fashion. "Ready for Willowbrook?" she asked, as our driver loaded modest luggage into the car. "Ready," I confirmed, surprising myself with the anticipation I felt. After years of forward momentum, constantly expanding and innovating, there was unexpected comfort in this journey backward, toward roots and origins, toward the quiet beginning of everything we'd built. The small regional airport in Minnesota could scarcely have presented a more dramatic contrast to Milan's sophisticated cosmopolitanism. As we collected our rental car, the April morning was cool and bright, the landscape still showing patches of winter while tentatively embracing spring. The drive to Willowbrook took just over an hour, the scenery gradually shifting from modest suburbs to open farmland dotted with small towns that seemed caught in gentler times. "Do you think it will have changed much?" I asked as we followed the GPS directions along increasingly narrow roads. Statistically speaking, rural communities with populations under 5,000 tend to experience minimal demographic and architectural change over 40-year periods, Eleanor replied, then caught herself with a small smile. But then again, Grandma always said time worked differently in Willowbrook. The town emerged on the horizon, a collection of buildings centered around a main street that might have been plucked from a Norman Rockwell painting. A water tower rose above the tree line, proudly proclaiming Willowbrook Est 1887 in faded blue paint. As we drove slowly down the main street, I could almost hear Grandma Evelyn's voice describing each landmark. The red brick post office with its American flag, the small movie theater showing weekend matinees, the Lutheran church with its modest white steeple. We parked in front of a cafe called Dot's Diner. Its windows steamed from the warmth inside. The interior was exactly what you might expect: checkered floors, vinyl booths, and the comforting aroma of coffee and homemade pie. A bell jingled as we entered, drawing the attention of the few mid-morning patrons. An elderly couple by the window, two farmers in conversation at the counter, a woman about our age working on a laptop. The waitress, a woman in her 60s, with a name tag reading Carol, approached with coffee pot in hand. "Just passing through or here for a reason?" she asked with the direct friendliness of small-town America. "A bit of both," I replied. "Our grandmother grew up here, Evelyn Crawford, before she married Richard Bennett. We thought we'd visit, see where she came from." Carol's face lit with recognition. Evie Crawford. Goodness, I haven't heard that name in years. She was a few years ahead of me in school, but everyone knew Evie. Her mother made the most beautiful wedding dresses, did alterations for half the county. She gestured to a booth by the window. "Sit yourselves down. I'm calling Marjorie Hanson. She..." And your grandmother were thick as thieves back in the day. She'll want to meet you." As we settled into the booth, accepting mugs of strong black coffee, I caught Eleanor's eye. We hadn't expected to find living connections to Grandma Evelyn, people who had known her as Evie and held memories of her we'd never accessed. Within 20 minutes, the diner's bell jingled again, announcing the arrival of a slender woman in her 80s, silver-haired and bright-eyed, moving with purpose despite her age. She spotted us immediately, perhaps because we were clearly not locals, perhaps because she saw something of her old friend in our faces. "You're Evie's granddaughters," she stated rather than asked, sliding into the booth opposite us. "I'd know those Bennett eyes anywhere. She wrote to me about you both, the scientist and the artist she called you." "She did?" Eleanor asked, sounding as surprised as I felt. "You kept in touch after she left Willowbrook?" Marjorie nodded, accepting a mug of coffee from Carol without taking her gaze from us. "For 60 years. Monthly letters right up until the end." "Your grandmother wasn't one for telephones or computers, but she was faithful with her correspondence." The revelation shifted something in my understanding of Grandma Evelyn. I'd always seen her primarily through the lens of her relationship to us, the supportive grandmother, the refuge from parental pressure. It had never fully occurred to me that she had a complete life beyond those roles, friendships and connections independent of her identity as our father's mother. "We'd love to hear about her," I said sincerely. "About Evie, I mean, not just Grandma." Marjorie's stories unfolded over the next 2 hours, accompanied by slices of homemade apple pie and endless coffee refills. She painted a portrait of young Evelyn Crawford that both aligned with and expanded our understanding of the woman we'd known. Headstrong and practical, creative but unsentimental, determined to chart her own course even when convention dictated otherwise. Evie was the only girl in our class who refused to take typing lessons, Marjorie recalled with a chuckle. Said she wasn't planning to become anybody's secretary, thank you very much. Instead, she convinced old Mr. Hoffman at the tailor shop to teach her pattern cutting after school. Most unconventional thing anyone had heard of. She described how Evelyn had stood up to the high school principal when he tried to prevent girls from taking mechanical drawing classes, how she'd organized a town fashion show featuring her own designs when she was just 16, how she'd saved every penny from summer jobs to buy a train ticket to Chicago, determined to see a world beyond Willowbrook's boundaries. "Your grandfather was the luckiest man alive when she agreed to marry him," Marjorie said firmly, though it nearly broke her mother's heart when they moved east. Margaret Crawford had assumed Evie would take over the family sewing business eventually. "The family business?" I repeated, leaning forward. This was a detail Grandma had never mentioned, that her mother had been an entrepreneur in her own right, not just a talented hobbyist. Marjorie nodded. "Crawford Custom Creations, they called it. Nothing fancy by city standards, I'm sure, but quite significant around here. Every bride within 30 miles wanted a Crawford wedding dress. Margaret had a real gift for looking at a woman and knowing exactly what style would suit her best. Evie inherited that eye, of course." I exchanged a glance with Eleanor, both of us absorbing the implications. The talent I'd attributed to personal inclination, the passion I'd defended as individual expression, had deeper roots than I'd realized. I wasn't an aberration in the family line. I was continuation, an inherited legacy temporarily interrupted by my father's generation. "Is the shop still here?" Eleanor asked. "The Crawford place?" "The building is," Marjorie confirmed. "It's the little blue house on Maple Street now. The town library has photos from those days, if you're interested." Margaret's wedding dresses were considered quite the local treasure. After thanking Marjorie and exchanging contact information with promises to send photographs from our grandmothers, later years we made our way to the town library, a modest brick building that had clearly once been someone's home. The librarian, hearing our connection to Evelyn Crawford Bennett, eagerly directed us to the local history section and pulled several albums from the archives. There, in fading black and white photographs, we discovered a visual history of our creative heritage. Margaret Crawford standing proudly before a shopfront bearing her business name. Young Evelyn helping to fit a radiant bride. A newspaper clipping announcing, "Local girl wins regional design contest," with our teenage grandmother holding a sketch of an evening gown. A town fashion show program listing, "Original designs by E. Crawford." "I had no idea," I murmured, carefully turning album pages. All those years I thought I was forging a completely new path, and I was actually following family footsteps without realizing it. Eleanor studied the photographs with her characteristic intensity. It makes you wonder what other family stories we never heard, what other legacies might have been lost because they didn't fit the narrative our parents constructed. We spent the afternoon exploring Willowbrook, visiting the site of the Crawford shop, now indeed a small blue house with a well-tended garden, walking the same streets our grandmother had walked as a young woman with dreams and ambitions that expanded beyond her surroundings. The town was both exactly as she had described it, and somehow more complex. Not just a setting for her childhood stories, but a community that had shaped her, challenged her, and ultimately launched her toward the life that would eventually include us. As dusk approached, we found ourselves in the town cemetery, standing before the Crawford family plot, where our great-grandparents and several great-aunts and uncles rested. The simplicity of the setting, soft green grass, modest headstones, the distant sound of a train whistle, held a profound peacefulness. "I wonder if she ever regretted leaving," I said softly. "If she ever missed the certainty of taking over the family business, staying in a place where everyone knew and valued her." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I think she understood something essential about life, that some gifts are meant to be passed on rather than kept. She could have stayed and inherited the Crawford legacy, but instead she carried it forward and eventually gave it to you." She glanced at me. "Not the business itself, but the spirit behind it. The belief that clothes aren't just functional objects, but expressions of identity and possibility." The insight struck me with unexpected force. In all my focus on building my own success story, proving my worth to a family that had underestimated me, I had perhaps missed the deeper narrative, that I was not self-made in the way I'd imagined, but part of a lineage of women who had expressed creativity and independence through needle and thread, pattern and fabric. Our return journey to Chicago the following day was quieter, both of us processing the discoveries of Willowbrook in our own ways. My thoughts kept returning to the photograph of Margaret Crawford's shop, a modest storefront that represented not just a business, but a philosophy that valued craftsmanship, personal expression, and the transformative power of well-made garments. How familiar those values felt, how central to everything I had built with Designed by Olivia. Back in my penthouse, preparing for the next leg of our journey to Tokyo, I found myself drawn to the framed Thanksgiving place card that had traveled with me through every office and home since that pivotal dinner. The word dreamer stared back at me, no longer a dismissal, but now seeming like an unintentional recognition of inheritance. The Crawford women had all been dreamers in their own ways, seeing possibilities beyond conventional expectations. I called my parents that evening, surprising them with our detour to Willowbrook and the discoveries we'd made there. My mother listened with unusual attentiveness as I described Margaret Crawford's wedding dress business and Grandma Evelyn's early design contests. "I had no idea," she admitted when I finished. "Your father's mother always seemed so conventional to me. The perfect homemaker, the supportive doctor's wife. I never imagined this whole other history. Maybe we all contain multitudes that others don't see," I suggested. Creative potential alongside practical skills, scientific precision alongside artistic vision. "Like you and your sister," my mother said thoughtfully. "Different expressions of the same fundamental drive for excellence." It was perhaps the most insightful observation she had ever made about her daughters, an acknowledgement that our differences were variations on a theme rather than evidence of comparative worth. After decades of feeling categorized and compartmentalized within our family, the recognition of our shared essence felt like a door opening to a roomier understanding of identity and achievement. The Tokyo Textile Laboratory opening proceeded with characteristic Japanese precision and ceremony. The facility represented the most ambitious expansion of Designed by Olivia's mission yet. Not just creating sustainable fashion, but developing new materials that could transform the industry. More broadly, a team of textile engineers, environmental scientists, and traditional artisans would collaborate to explore innovations at the intersection of ancient techniques and cutting-edge technology. As I cut the ceremonial ribbon and delivered remarks to the assembled guests and media, I found myself acknowledging influences and inspirations I had never publicly credited before. This laboratory continues a legacy that began generations ago in a small Midwestern town, I explained to the attentive audience. My great-grandmother created custom garments that transformed how women in her community presented themselves to the world. My grandmother carried that vision forward, believing that clothing could be both beautiful and meaningful. Today, we extend that legacy into new frontiers of sustainability and innovation. Eleanor, standing among the honored guests, caught my eye with a small nod of recognition and approval. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the significance of placing our work within this larger context, acknowledging that even our most personal achievements are built upon foundations laid by others, shaped by histories both known and hidden. The weeks following the Tokyo opening brought a fresh wave of media attention, with prominent features in business and fashion publications highlighting our expansion into textile research and development. One particularly thoughtful profile in The New Yorker explored the evolution of Designed by Olivia from boutique brand to industry influencer, tracing our growth alongside shifts in consumer consciousness about sustainability and ethical production. What struck me most about the article wasn't the praise for our business model or design philosophy, but the writer's observation about our company culture. Bennett has created something increasingly rare in the fashion industry, an organization that values both innovation and heritage, technical precision and human connection, global reach and personal touch. Employees speak of the Designed by Olivia way, an approach to work that integrates mind and heart, ambition and authenticity. Reading those words in my Tokyo hotel room, I found myself thinking not about the Thanksgiving dinner where my family had laughed at my failure before learning of my success, but about Grandma Evelyn's kitchen table where she had taught me that handmade gifts carried meaning machine-made objects never could. About Margaret Crawford's small-town shop where brides had come for dresses that expressed their truest selves rather than merely following fashion. About generations of women finding purpose and expression through the transformative potential of fabric and design. My phone chimed with a message from Eleanor, checking on my arrival time for our planned dinner with Japanese investors. Her text included a postscript. Father called. He's been going through Grandma's old papers and found something he thinks you should see. Says he'll keep it safe until we're back in Chicago. Curiosity lingered through the remainder of our Tokyo meetings. What could my father have discovered among Grandma Evelyn's papers that warranted special mention? Her important documents had been reviewed years ago after her passing. These must be more personal items, perhaps letters or photographs previously overlooked. Upon returning to Chicago the following week, I arranged to meet my father for lunch at his favorite restaurant, an old-school steakhouse where the maitre d' still greeted him as Dr. Bennett, despite his retirement from surgical practice. He arrived carrying a slim leather portfolio, weathered with age but clearly well-preserved. After brief catching up about my international trip and his latest golf scores, he carefully opened the portfolio on the table between us. Inside was a collection of sketches, women's dresses and suits rendered in confident pencil strokes, annotated with fabric suggestions and construction notes in familiar handwriting. "These are Grandma's designs," I said, carefully turning the delicate pages. "From when she was young." My father nodded. I found them in an old trunk in the attic while looking for tax records. I never knew she had created these. There are dates on some of them, most from before she met my father, but a few from the early years of their marriage. The sketches revealed a talent and vision I had recognized in fragments through Grandma's sewing lessons, but had never seen so comprehensively displayed. The designs were both of their era and somehow timeless, showing the same eye for proportion and detail that had drawn me to fashion from childhood. "There's something else," my father said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a yellowed envelope addressed to my granddaughter Olivia in Grandma Evelyn's distinctive script. This was tucked between the pages. It's never been opened. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted the envelope. The paper was brittle with age, the seal intact. "When do you think she wrote this?" Based on where it was in the portfolio, I'd guess shortly after your high school fashion competition, the one where your mother and I attended Eleanor's graduation instead. His voice held a note of regret I'd never heard before. She must have intended to give it to you herself, but never found the right moment. I carefully opened the envelope, trying not to damage its fragile contents. Inside was a single page of writing paper, covered in Grandma Evelyn's precise handwriting. My dearest Olivia, today I watched you receive your award alone, sitting in the back of the auditorium where you couldn't see me. Your parents don't know I attended. They believe I'm keeping my bridge club appointment. But some things are more important than cards or conventions. Your designs show the same spark I once felt, the same desire to create beauty that serves a purpose beyond mere decoration. In you, I see the continuation of a legacy that began before me and will extend beyond both of us. The understanding that how we present ourselves to the world matters, that craftsmanship carries meaning, that clothes can be armor or expression or transformation. I have enclosed $5,000 for your future education, but the real inheritance I hope to give you is permission. Permission to follow your vision, even when others cannot yet see where it leads. Permission to define success on your own terms, not through others' limited understanding. In my youth, I compromised my creative ambitions to meet the expectations of my time. My mother's dress shop closed when I moved east with your grandfather, ending a tradition that might have continued. While I don't regret the life and family those choices gave me, I sometimes wonder about paths not taken. You, my dear girl, have been born into a time of broader horizons. Don't let anyone, not even those who love you most, narrow your vision to fit their understanding. The world needs dreamers who bring their dreams to life through determination and skill. The world needs you, exactly as you are. With love and absolute faith in your journey. Grandma Evelyn. I read the letter twice, then silently passed it to my father. His expression shifted as he absorbed his mother's words, pride giving way to recognition, then to a complex emotion I couldn't quite identify. "She knew," he said finally, returning the letter to me. "She saw in you what we couldn't, or wouldn't, see. And she made provisions to support your path even when we were pushing you toward something entirely different. She believed in me," I said simply, before I had evidence to justify that belief. My father nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That may be the greatest gift anyone can offer, faith in potential that hasn't yet been proven. He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry it took us so much longer to offer you the same." The letter changed nothing about the past. The missed award ceremonies, the dismissal of my passion as frivolous, the Thanksgiving mockery that had preceded recognition. Yet somehow it changed everything about how I held those memories. Grandma Evelyn had not just supported my journey, she had recognized it as continuation of her own unrealized ambitions, the fulfillment of creative potential that circumstances had constrained for her generation. That evening, I carefully framed the letter alongside one of Grandma's sketches, a design for an evening gown that bore striking similarities to a piece in my first collection, though I had never seen her drawing before. I hung them in my home, studio where I could see them daily, a reminder that success has many definitions beyond financial metrics or public acclaim. The $750,000 side business that had shocked my family that Thanksgiving had grown into something far more significant than a vindication of my choices or proof of my worth. It had become the vehicle for recovering lost family history, for healing intergenerational misunderstandings, and for carrying forward a legacy of creativity that might otherwise have remained buried in attic trunks and fading memories. True, success, I realized, wasn't measured in store locations or magazine features or balance sheets, though these external validations certainly held their own satisfaction. It was measured in authenticity, in creative fulfillment, in the confidence to follow your vision even when others cannot yet see its value. And perhaps most importantly, in the courage to recognize that even our most personal achievements are never entirely our own. They are built upon foundations laid by others, shaped by histories both acknowledged and hidden, connected to legacies we may discover only after the journey is well underway. The path from dismissed to respected, from underestimated to acclaimed, had never really been about proving others wrong. It had been about proving Grandma Evelyn right, about honoring her belief in possibilities others couldn't yet see, about transforming dreams into reality through persistence and skill, about defining success through integrity to personal vision rather than conformity to external expectations. In the end, my $750K side business had revealed a truth far more valuable than financial validation, that we are all, in our own ways, carrying forward threads of family legacy, whether consciously continuing traditions or unconsciously expressing inherited gifts. The most meaningful success comes not from breaking free of our roots, but from recognizing their deepest influence and allowing them to nourish rather than constrain our growth. As I prepared for the next chapter of Designed by Olivia's evolution, new collections, new markets, new innovations in sustainable fashion, I carried this understanding as both anchor and compass. The dismissal at that Thanksgiving dinner had been merely one moment in a much longer story that had begun generations before me and would continue long after. My part was not to prove critics wrong, but to honor the truth of my inherited gifts, to expand possibilities for those who would come after, and to create beauty that served purpose beyond mere decoration, just as Margaret Crawford and Evelyn Bennett had done in their own times and ways. Success, I had learned, was never only personal achievement. It was participation in something larger than oneself. A legacy of vision, resilience, and creative transformation passed from one generation to the next, sometimes underground like a river, sometimes visible like a beacon, but always flowing forward, always seeking expression in new forms suitable to changing times. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.